You're listening to Cardiff City World on Cymru Sport Radio, live from the Welsh capital. The most interactive football show in Wales, featuring guests, fan opinion, and all the latest news surrounding Cardiff City. Have your say and get in touch now.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Si. Welcome to Cardiff City World, live on Cymru Sport Radio. We're here for a slightly shorter show this evening, but it is no less detailed and no less interesting. Where did it all go wrong for Cardiff City? It's been a humiliating and depressing season for Cardiff City fans and the football club as a whole. I am joined by Mr. Jamie Anderson, and we are going to deep dive into the season. We're going to break it down into sections, and we're going to discuss exactly where that situation has arisen and how badly it was managed throughout. But we'll take it, as I say, a deep dive into it. And of course, in between, we'll have a few clips from throughout the season of different shows and guests just to kind of tie it in. But Jamie, how are you, mate?
I'm all right as I can be, I suppose, Si. Don't feel anything now. I suppose this what's happened. It's what's happened has happened. I went to Norwich on Saturday and I felt very, probably emotionless. I think it already it settled in. We knew what was what. And I think that probably added to the atmosphere where we all just 1,200 of us still had a laugh even when Norwich scored. And, like I said, there's been plenty of, let's say, questionable moments this season and a lot of mistakes which weren't learned upon.
Yeah, it's been something which has been going on for years. Cardiff City as a football club have not learned their lessons. They haven't addressed the issues. And of course, we'll dig into all of this. But I think one thing you can say is that I think the fans this year, yes, the home crowds have been a bit up and down, but the away fans particularly, the fans have followed them up and down the country in numbers. They've backed, all the managers, whether that was Errol Bullitt at the start of the season, Omer Riza, even when Omer Riza was making some of those questionable decisions, which people didn't necessarily understand or agree with, they still backed him on match days. They backed the team, they backed the players. And even after relegation, we still took over 1,000 fans up to Norwich. And I think the fans deserve an incredible amount of credit. And I would like to see the football club repay that to the fans now in the summer and almost immediately by, appointing a manager, appointing a structure and a management team. And actually, let's run this football club like a professional football club instead of a badly run grassroots football club.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've only had to listen to Aaron Ramsey say at his last 2 press conferences about structure. Key word, key thing at any football club or in any organisation or business, having the right structure, the right people in roles which are relevant to what is needed. I think, unfortunately, at our club, we've had a history of mismanaging situations and mismanaging things, but that shouldn't deter what we need. Every football club has it. And like I said, it's a summer of opportunity. It's definitely a summer for reflection, but also it's a summer that we have to get right because if it's not right now, then whenever will it be right?
I think one of the things I find frustrating and one of the things I think the club has to immediately address is having a football operations team, whatever that looks like, whether it's a big team of, 10 people or whether it's just a small team of 4 or 5 that are there day in, day out. They know exactly what's going on with the first team, the academy, the development teams. They know what's going on at the football club day to day. So if we do end up with say an Aaron Ramsey, for example, as the manager, he has his coaches and his team that he works with. But there's also a team or a couple of people above him who are experienced football people who are involved and talking to him on a daily basis. So they've got their finger on the pulse of what's happening at the football club. Because I think one of the biggest criticisms of the owner and the board, and I think it's a fair criticism, is that they're very rarely at the football club. So let alone day-to-day running of the football club. And I think that is an issue. Like, you've only got to look around the Premier League, the Championship. Look at Wrexham, 3 promotions back to back. The first thing their owners did is appoint football people, and those football people are there every day talking to the manager, talking to the coaches. They know what's going on. and they have a strategic plan always for every occurrence.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, imagine doing an audit. If you're an external auditor coming into Cardiff City, and you've looked at the ever, say, 23 Championship clubs, you could probably bet your bottom dollar that that we haven't got people in specific roles. I mean, you alluded to it there, day to day, not week to week. Generally, like Ken Chu, I know, does turn up on match days. That's majority of the time. Dalman quite sporadically, and so on. But does that constitute a positive running of a football club? I don't think so. I think you need to have, like you said, at a board level, at every single level, someone there dealing with the right things. If you look at, say, Ramsey, he's not going to want to deal with players' agents and so on and so forth. He wants to concentrate on what's on the pitch. But at this time of year, we should have a plan, like any team should, about players, who will go in and so on and so forth. It should all be set in writing. And a plan is something I don't think Cardiff City have had probably for, well, in my opinion, out of the last 4 seasons, we've only had one positive finish, and that was mid-table, wasn't it, last year? So you can't even say there was a plan there. So I think the scrutiny that they've got and the criticism they've got is warranted. And like I said, the only way, unfortunately, at the minute is up, I'd hope. But it's a shame that we've gone down to a league, to League One, because this should have been implemented a long, long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, the issues, as I said, the issues have been there for a while now, and they should have been addressed and fixed, and we wouldn't be in this situation, even, with Errol Bullitt. And I know he wasn't everyone's cup of tea. He stabilised the club last season. And even that wasn't like they didn't have that plan to kick on from that. They dillied and dallied about giving him a contract, and then it was late. And then you had the problems with the recruitment then as the window went on. I wanted to just, before because we're going to divide the season up into kind of 4 sections, and we're going to kind of talk about it. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you about something which has been a very viral story over the last few days since Norwich. It was the last game of the season in the Championship on Saturday. Obviously, Cardiff away to Norwich, a very early start for fans. I think 4:30 you'd have been leaving. So, it's a long trip, but the fans did it. They did in the numbers. There's been this controversy about first-team players who were not selected going elsewhere, and particularly going to other football matches to watch their former clubs or their, the clubs they support, or, effectively not being with their teammates to see through the season, not thanking the fans. I know that was done at the, the last home game to an extent. What do you make of it? Do you think it's a bit of a drama over nothing, or do you kind of fall on the side of it's a bit disrespectful and this, that, and the other?
Yeah, I suppose there's arguments to both sides, isn't it? Like you said, there is win or lose, they're in it together, aren't they? So you could argue that they should be there. If we're a home or away, they should still be there as a team. And again, if it's the final game in the Championship, they should all be there and they should all be doing it. But however, I suppose you can look at it and go, well, they were probably told in advance anyway by Ramsey and co, which we're not privy to, obviously, that information. Listen, you're not in the squad, so why would they be there? And again, I think players are entitled to, I suppose, their own time. Yes, it's ill-advised. I mean, if you're caught on a camera like Yaku Mete was at someone else's game, yes, it was your former club, you're going to open yourself up for scrutiny. I think a lot of it comes down to emotion, though. So I think, again, when you've had such a poor season and our fans naturally are upset, they're angry, they feel almost a sense of betrayal from the club. You're going to look at these, sort of these incidents and think, hang on a minute, were you fully invested? Were you actually giving your all for the club? I mean, I know Callum Robinson in the last hour or two has been kind of replying on X, isn't he, to the BBC Wales quote and stuff like that. So, he's in his right entitlement to do that if his name is being sort of brandished around. Yaku can't do that because at the end of the day he was pictured on the pitch, wasn't he? But again, professionalism, I suppose that's a big thing for me, is if you're going to go somewhere else, make sure you're probably on your own. You're not sat, for example, in a pub, wherever it may be, whatever public setting. Just have a knowledge that your own team are playing, so it doesn't probably help, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, look, this is what I kind of put on X yesterday, and I kind of stand by it. I said, I've got no issue if there would be no issue if their attitudes, and this is not aimed at any individual, this is the collective, there's no issue if their attitudes, dressing room disruptions, general lack of care hadn't just seen us bottom of the league. Now, technically, if they had permission and they're not in the squad, they've done nothing wrong. But for me, that dressing room and the culture within it has been an issue all season. And let's be brutally honest, it isn't the young players that have been causing the problems.
No.
So that for me, and like you say, it's probably just a bad look. But like for me, it's a culture which, like, it has to be cleared out now. Cardiff have to be brave. They have to take no prisoners, and they have to say, look, thank you for your service, but we need to evolve the squad, and we need desperately to make this club and this dressing room a positive place and atmosphere, particularly when you've got such a large group of young players in the group already and more coming in.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the players. Let's talk of the players that. It was Al Ghazi's birthday, I think it was, wasn't it? So you would imagine that he'd be doing something for his birthday. However, it wasn't in the public domain, so therefore that's, I suppose that helps him. The other players, who weren't there, like Brynner Motor wasn't there. Again, he, for all you can know, he could be up with his family and stuff like that. So there are people that are not going to sit in their house or their flats, wherever they may be. But again, I think it's just having that sort of that apathy, that sort of general sort of, knowledge to say, hang on a minute, it might not look good more than anything, even though your intentions aren't to cause a stir or anything like that. When your teammates are playing and you're watching Reading at 3:00, for example, with Yaku Mate, and and again, that's not to say that Yaku wasn't, for example, upstairs in Reading's ground or wherever he was watching it on his phone. But again, it sets this sort of narrative then, like you said, that, you don't care, you haven't cared all season. And again, he's received messages, as we've already seen, which he then has created another little bit of, let's say, unnecessary criticism, I suppose, or unnecessary publicity for the club that they don't necessarily need.
Absolutely. And I think this will be Aaron Ramsey or whoever takes over as manager is their biggest challenge. And one of the reasons why I'm kind of leaning on Aaron Ramsey with the right people around him being the better choice is because he's been there. He knows, with the greatest of respect, he knows which personalities are a problem for whatever reason. That might be that they're really disruptive, or they might just not have the right attitude towards Cardiff City or football or whatever. He might not like the way, they might not take it seriously enough. Whatever, there's a whole host of reasons, but he's been there and he's seen it. If you bring in a new manager, and it could be anyone, Ruben Sellers, Ryan Lowe, whoever, just all these different names, Nathan Jones, whoever, they are all going to give every single person at the football club in the dressing room, the first team, they're going to give them a fresh start. And that worries me because I think it's been very clear that this squad this year is not together. And I think Joe Ralls and Aaron Ramsey deserve a lot of credit because I think they did everything they physically could to try and keep that squad together as best they could and, going in the right direction and fighting to stay up. But no miracle workers at the end of the day.
And again, I think, when I attended the Sol Bamba tribute evening, Sean Morrison was there, Lee Peltier there. And the one big thing that they said, I suppose, went towards their success was there was multiple personalities in that change room and so on, but there were also leaders. And you can't have enough leaders in the group, even though you're not wearing an armband. There's people in that change room who weren't afraid to tell people if they weren't pulling the line, so to say, and if they weren't up to the standards. Now, you could argue this season that, unfortunately, there hasn't been enough leadership, whether that's at the top of the club or, it's flowing down. But listen, the way I look at it is these players are in a very fortunate position that many youngsters around South Wales and further afar would love to be in. You see our youngsters this year, the likes of Cian Ashford, Ruben Colwell, and so on and so forth, who've come into the team. And they probably set more of a positive tone and had a more of a positive impact, especially with their work ethic, than some of the more professional and more experienced players have. And I think if that's happening at your football club, then I think you probably do have an issue. And again, like whether that's an environmental thing, with the environment that with you, like we said earlier on, no day-to-day running of a CEO, etc., or whether that's just an attitude thing. Now, if that's an attitude thing, then I think if you ask 100 fans, 99 would probably say that they wouldn't want that bad apple in the club.
Absolutely. You mentioned leaders, and obviously one of the great leaders of Cardiff City is Sol Bamba, who you mentioned there. Sadly, we lost Sol on the 31st of August, right at the beginning of the season. During that sort of weekend where that news broke, I was lucky enough to be joined by Paul Abbandonato, and he spent a good hour or so paying tribute to Sol, someone who he knew very well. It was quite an emotional show for him. It was very difficult. I know when I spoke to him afterwards, but let's just check out a little clip and pay tribute to Sol. Obviously, I didn't realise quite how long he was here. He was here from 2016 to 2021, made over 100 appearances, which, funny enough, it's not funny, I suppose, but I was editing our Question of Cardiff City game show a bit earlier. And of course, one of the questions which came up was, can you name as many players who've made 100 league appearances for Cardiff City in X amount of seconds or whatever it was? And obviously, he didn't make those league appearances. But I was interested in watching it back that no one had mentioned him, and I didn't realise that he had made 112 appearances for the club. But there was a lot of people calling for him to get the manager's job at one point, not too long ago.
Yeah, and I'd have been all for that, not just because I knew him well, although obviously that maybe within the heart that has a bearing, but I just felt there was a really, really good manager in the making in Sol. He obviously, it goes without saying, he's a leader of men, and that's the first point of call to be a manager, obviously. But he was hugely intelligent. I think he spoke something like 5 different languages. His tactical knowledge, the way he used to talk about the game, it just sort of, just took you to another level, if you like. And not everyone does that, Simon. You get a bit immune to it, if you like. But, you're almost hanging on to he was talking about how if he got the job, he would change the approach and play 3 at the back with Junior Hoylett as a wing back and things like that. He was ahead of the game in terms of thinking these things a few years ago. But I also always felt that because of his immense contacts in the game, and to my shame, I didn't realise how much pedigree Sol had in other countries as well. So how often he played for the Ivory Coast with PSG, things like that. But I always felt that, I really fancy the idea of Sol Bamba via his contacts unearthing a few gems from the continent, midfield gems who in years to come would be worth multi-millions to Cardiff City. So I thought it would potentially make sound business sense as well. I actually think with the right coaching setup around him, he'd have made a brilliant manager. But it was, unfortunately, obviously never to be.
You're listening to Cymru Sport.
Welcome back to the show. So, mate, we're going to dig into the first part of the show, first part of the season, apologies. But before we do, I just wanted to address something. Algorithm in the chat there, good name, by the way, says, talk about not learning from your mistakes. Ramsey as manager is romantic BS and would be another disaster. We need someone with experience. So I just wanted to clarify. I did talk about it in detail the other night, but I just want to clarify for anyone who didn't see that. The reason why I think that it could be a good idea is kind of twofold. One, I just mentioned there about he knows the issues within the squad, so he knows which players are probably not suited to what we need. But equally, apart from being very, very, very highly rated as a football mind and all the, all those elements of it, he will not take the job unless Cardiff City make the relevant changes to the structure, the recruitment, and all the things that us as fans and media and everything, have been crying out for and saying that Cardiff City need for so many years. Which means if he's becoming the new manager, those structural changes which need to be made will be made. I also would clarify that if he was to take over with, Chris Gunter or whoever as his assistant and he gets his coaches, I think it's absolutely imperative that the club would give him someone, whether it's someone within that football operations management team who's there on a daily basis, or it's someone in the coaching team, or it's the director of football, but someone who he's got a good relationship with, who's experienced, that he has that support from. And then I think if you get the right people in those positions, I do think it can work, because, I'm sure you, Jamie, as well, have heard how highly people speak of Aaron in terms of his ability, not on the pitch, but actually off the pitch, and his mind for football and how to, to do those things. That's why I think it could be a good idea. I'm not saying that it's the only idea. I just think, for me, I look at it and I think, as I said, any other manager is going to give everyone a fresh start, which I don't think is the best idea. I also think if they appoint someone else from the outside, they will not make the structural changes, and we will be destined to repeat the same cycle. By Christmas, there'll be people calling for the manager. By the end of the season, he'll be gone. We'll have another interim manager, and then it will go round and round in circles. So I just wanted to clarify that and my thinking with it, because I do understand it's a bit contradictory where I'm saying, Omer Riza was not experienced enough. That's one of the reasons that's contributed to us going down. And then on the other hand, I'm going, Aaron Ramsey would be a good shout. I get it. Like, I do get, I'm not stupid, but like, I wanted to just clarify that. If you've got anything to add on that, mate, you crack on.
No, I think it's a natural worry, isn't it, for fans, especially now we haven't been in this position for 20 plus years. Like you said there, home truths for me need to be told, just like any human being. If your business or you've operated in a certain way in any role that you're in life, and you fail to live up to your promises and expectations, you have to be open up for criticism. You have to take it, because at the end of the day, the statistics don't lie, and people have got a right to sort of argue why. This is a football club that in the past has been very, very big and successful, and if it's driven the right way and led the right way, it becomes a bigger force again. We only have to look at Birmingham, what they did last year to come back up, because they got their fans back on side. They had a new lease of life. We could be that, but again, like I said, I think that has to start at the top, and then it has to be a structure in place that is very, very firm, so that if anything did arise, like you said, if let's say Ramsey didn't do particularly well, that we wouldn't have this mad scurry and this lack of idea that, hang on, who are we going to get, what we're going to get. My only worry would be, like you said there, is if someone external came into the building, would they be as knowledgeable in terms of how the club's been operated and operating as Ramsey? And I don't think they are, because I don't think until you get inside the club, you probably truly understand how, for example, the likes of Vincent Tan operate, and other people around that area, at the board level and so on. So the dynamics of the club are huge, and maybe that gives him a bit more of a sort of a bargaining chip if he does want the job, to say, listen, I want this, I want that, I want this. And maybe that's what we need, someone just to tell the board for once, this is what I want and this is what I'm going to get.
Absolutely, mate. And I think just on that, just to finish off on that subject, Wales Keep the Faith 1969 says, if Tan is going to listen to anyone, I'm sure it'll be Ramsey. I'm not sure that Vincent Tan would listen to a new manager coming in, and therefore you have the same old. And that's what I was referring to. It's like that same cycle. So, look, I understand people's like reluctance or worry with regards to it. But I also think that with the right, and to be clear, I'm not saying just give him a job, and even the coaching staff that he finished the season with, I would say there needs to be some tweaks to that. Like I think you need a bit more experience in there. You need certain personalities in there. And I think if you get the right people around him, then it could be the way to go. But we shall see how it develops. Going back to the start of this season, mate, last summer, I had a couple of concerns early doors, but I was very positive going into the season. I felt we'd had a decent window, with the exception of Wilfred Kanga. But at the time, going into the season, you look at Wilfred Kanga on paper, you look at the pedigree he's got and the clubs he's played for, you're thinking, all right, he could come in the Championship and do it. He's big, he's strong. He scored a few goals. I've, Alex Robertson, good signing. Will Fish on paper again looks decent. So on paper, I thought it looked okay, and it was more the way we had done it, because we moved quite quickly last year with the signings. We didn't have weeks and weeks of ITK accounts going, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. Oh, tomorrow. It was like, oh, Cardiff are linked with this person. Oh, it's done. And that was a change. And that was part of my reason for being a little bit more positive than usual. However, one of my big concerns from pre-season was the level of opposition that we played, first and foremost, and the way that Errol Bullitt split the squad up, so that, like, you were playing very much, the youngsters didn't really play a great deal of football with the first team. The first team players didn't seem to play a lot of football in that pre-season until right at the end of the pre-season. It was very strange the way it did it. And that, to me, it just felt like, from a fitness point of view, and also just a general being up to speed kind of point of view, I didn't think we were going to be ready. On the flip side of that, one of the things that I was very happy about was the change in shape, where in possession we were playing with like a 2, just leaving 2 defenders back, 3 in the midfield, and we had 5 across the front, which is what Errol Bullitt had kind of promised at the end of last season. He'd stabilize things, and now we'd see him get his players in, and he'd be able to play a more progressive style. In pre-season, the shape was definitely more aggressive and more progressive. The fullbacks were right on the front line. It was very wide, very exciting. By half time in that first game of the season against Sunderland, that had been abandoned, and it was back to 4-4-5-1 effectively. Pass, side, create nothing, make silly mistakes. How did you feel going into that Sunderland game, and how did you do you think the pre-season was good enough?
I think pre-season, I think we looked a bit leggy, and that sounds daft saying it, but when you look at the coaching setup the Errol Bullitt had, I think it was Nikolai Kasidis, wasn't it? He was one of the coaches, but his history was obviously of a fitness background. You go out and you play in Austria, you play a decent opposition who's in Hamburg and things like that, and you think, oh, there's positives here. You see a high intensity, and then when that doesn't replicate to the first game of the season, albeit against a decent Sunderland side who now, as we talk, are in the playoffs, you think, what's gone on? Why have, after 45 minutes, have we gone back to sort of last year? And I mean, you can look at the recruitment and think, at the time, I'll put my hands up. I was like, Callum Chambers, brilliant signing. This experience. Chris Willock, you look at him, what he did for QPR, you think, oh, great. But looking back on it, was it the case of just getting them in for the name as opposed to what they could possibly fit into a system? Maybe, I don't know. I mean, but when that window shut at the beginning of the year, I was thinking we've still got quite a few holes. Square pegs, round holes came to my mind, where players were being played in not their natural positions, and like you said, it was playing with inverted wingers became a thing again. It was like, why are we playing so narrow? Teams are just playing around us, and it was just too easy. I mean, that replicates when you look, like, and we're going to discuss now about the first, was it Bullett's first 6 games of the season to score, what was it, only 1 or 2 goals in those games? Yeah, it was, and that can't happen at any level of football, albeit you're playing against 2 good sides in Middlesbrough, Sunderland, and what have you. We were just ripped open, and it was just like, what was the plan? What constitutes progress from the season before? And there was certainly some alarm bells ringing, and I think various reporters did question, didn't they, after the first 2 games? They were saying, well, why are we playing a certain way? And I just don't think Errol had the answers. And I think in his body language, you could see that he was becoming very frustrated with elements of the club where he wanted certain players from Greece, respectively, and other places like that. And he didn't get them.
Yeah, I mean, since Errol Bullitt left, I've been lucky enough to chat to a couple of his coaching staff. And they are of the opinion, or they feel that the club let them down a little bit with recruitment, and they didn't get the players they wanted. And And I think you can see it from Errol Bullett's interview recently, or fairly recently. He was kind of saying, like, yes, he wanted to be a bit more aggressive and a bit more attacking this season, but he didn't get the players to do it. Now, is that on him because he targeted players that are probably not realistic? Or is that on the recruitment team? I've said a couple of times recently, I think the recruitment team have had a bit of an easy ride recently. I don't think they've been held to account as much as, you know, some other parts of the club. But ultimately, Errol Bullett's biggest problem was, you know, defensively relatively sound last season. This season, all of a sudden, it wasn't. That was obviously a big issue. We just conceded goals for fun in those first 6 games. But we just didn't create anything under Errol Bullett. And that goes back to last year. You know, we was relying on set pieces. And I think when you're relying on set pieces to create chances, you could stick Haaland in there. You could stick Harry Kane in there. You could stick Pele in there. It doesn't matter who you put in there. If you don't get the ball to them and you don't create those opportunities, they're not going to score. And I think that was always the concern, that we weren't creating. Now, if we'd scored 1 goal in 6, but we were the top of the league for chances created, you'd be all right. It'll come. You know, those chances will eventually get taken. We're early season, etc., etc. But we created little to nothing, made silly mistakes. And I was disappointed. You know, that halftime in that Sunderland game, the first half was not only so poor, but the team looked unbalanced. Callum Chambers had a bit of a nightmare, if I remember correctly. Willock was playing off the left and Tanner off the right. So like you mentioned rightly, there was no width. The midfield looked very, very leggy because it was an aging midfield. You had Siopis, Rawls and Ramsey as a 3, probably the oldest midfield in the Championship all season. So that was a problem. What I was more disappointed with was that the kind of exciting shape that we'd had in pre-season, he just dropped it almost immediately. I had assumed, just going back to what you said about the balance of the squad being off and there still being holes, I had kind of assumed when looking at it after the window closed that Callum Chambers was going to play right back, because we only had 1 right back at the football club, which is insane, you know? And I know Capacchio obviously came through and obviously had the injury then. But Rinamoto played the majority of the games at right back this season. He's a midfield player. And I think he showed actually late in the season that he absolutely is a midfield player, not a right back. He did a good job at right back, but he showed that what he could have done in midfield. As the season, those first 6 games, look, they were painful. And I think, you know, yeah, you check, there's a couple of League Cup games in there where we see the youngsters and there's probably a bit of positivity. But Omer Riza's in very quickly. I think it was 6 games, wasn't it? 6 games. We had 1 goal, 1 point. Errol Bullett was relieved of his duties. Omer Riza is appointed interim manager. First game was against Hull, and we lost 4-1. But it was a very strange game because we lost 4-1, but there was actually some positivity because we had actually created a bit of chances. El Ghazi had got an assist. Callum Robinson had scored. You know, we'd scored a goal. So there was almost like, I think their goalkeeper made 4 saves against our 5. They scored 4 goals. You know, we created opportunities. So even though we lost the game, I think we had 16 shots on goal. So, you know, that's immediately a big change to what we'd seen under Errol Bullett. So I think people had a bit of optimism, right? Well, at least it's going to be exciting, or at least we're going to look like trying to win football matches. Unfortunately, after that initial run, it kind of didn't last. But when Errol Bullett left, Omer Riza is appointed an interim manager. Where was your head at, if you can remember? Like, how did you feel about those sort of decisions and the way the team was shaping up early season?
Well, I mean, he changed it quite significantly, didn't he? I mean, again, it was another centre-half partnership at Hull away. I remember we were there and we went 1-0 up for okay. But then we did the typical thing. I mean, Jamaru Collins, one of his only appearances of the game, of the season, and it was a catastrophe. He was getting torn left, right. You know, it was coming through him. And I thought, you know, it was a gamble, wasn't it? Let's be honest. You know, you're not expecting much anyway against the whole side that on paper, you know, they had a very good side. We don't particularly do well at Hull. But when the goals were going in, it was just constant. It was a constant flow, wasn't it? It was like, okay, there's another one. That's another avoidable goal. You've got a centre-half partnership where you brought Will Fish in. You're thinking, well, Will Fish hasn't played. So it was a gamble again. Where I was at with Riza was like any fan. I think you've made a change. You're kind of hoping there's a plan. You're hoping that, this is an interim basis and there's some sort of idea behind it. And, at that early stage of a season, there's going to be someone that you can get off, some sort of manager. But then as time goes on in the next block of games, you think, there's names being thrown into the hat, but there's nothing, there's no wheels in motion. It's almost like they're just keeping it going. And granted, he had some good results, in his little spell as he comes along. But I don't think, it's hard to describe. I don't think everyone were fully invested and felt confident in the direction that we were going in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the story of the season was just too many draws, wasn't it? Ultimately, interestingly, Will Fish played against Hull. That was his only start until after Christmas, which is, when you think how he finished the season, is crazy when you think of the problems we had at defence. And look, one of the biggest issues I think we had in terms of selecting the team this year is the constant changing of the centre-back partnership. I think that was a big issue.
Yeah.
So where I was at going into, coming into October, going into that, the Christmas period's coming up, I was very much of the opinion, right, Rhys is going to get a little bit of a bounce out of us because he's going to be a bit more aggressive. So at least we might pick up a couple of wins. We beat Plymouth and teams like this. But coming into Christmas, I was really hoping and hearing as well that, we had a couple of managers that we were speaking to. There was one in particular that was kind of almost in place, and you're thinking, right, now we've got a plan. It looks like a good selection of, some of the managers look like interesting selections for this squad. The run going into Christmas and over Christmas was absolutely disastrous. And in my opinion, look, the league table doesn't lie. Over the season, we haven't been good enough. But that Christmas period and going into just from the start of December till Boxing Day was absolutely disastrous. Absolutely killed us for the whole season. We never recovered from it. If you can remember, mate, going into that Christmas period, there was a few different managers linked and stuff. Was there many of those linked managers where you were like, oh, that could be an interesting selection, or you felt like that was quite a good one?
I think at one point I was thinking, obviously you heard the name of Bilic and stuff like that, and the experience from that, I think that I was on a bit on the edge of that, because I was thinking he's trying to implement a new way of playing, isn't he? He's trying to go attack, and he's trying to do that, which sounds daft considering that the run we were on was the opposite. We were struggling to score and we conceded poorest goals. But Bilic was the one, I think, that was being brandished around left, right and centre, wasn't it? Bilic or Ryan Lowe, or, the talks are ongoing. And we talk about Riza. Like, Riza's thing was, I think you look through his rookie management, so to say, in terms of he is an inexperienced manager. Bristol City away was the big one for me. Like, I think that was the one where we were like, why has he gone 5 at the back? And he kept doing it. He would change things and it would be almost detrimental to the team. Like, it'd be like, well, hang on a minute, why you've gone 5 at the back? Or why are you bought on this player? Because, we lost the momentum in the game. And then like you go into Christmas time, you've had a positive result up in Sheffield, then you lose at home to QPR, and you think, at the time QPR were very low in the league. You shouldn't be losing that game. Then you go away to Coventry, you think you're going to win, but then we give the penalty away at the end, go away to Stoke, another goal we gift away at the end. So we're losing points and winning positions again. I think overall of the season, it was 25, I think it was, points lost. And then you had that debacle on Boxing Day. Boxing Day up in Oxford was absolutely horrific. The fans' first half were brilliant. But the players, they sabotaged it. It was like they just imploded. And I remember people were singing, "You're not fit to wear the shirt." There was all this, sort of, it was just negative. Everyone was really, really unhappy, because it was almost like a must-win game. Even at earlier stage of the season, you were thinking, we need to get some points here. We need to get some points. And then when you're 3-0 down, you're thinking, oh my goodness, how? And then he's making changes, and you see in certain players like Al Ghazi, who's in on the goalkeeper and shirks out a challenge with the goalkeeper. you just think to yourself, this is not good. And like I said, even though we lost 3-2 that day, fans were voicing their concerns. They were really unhappy. But in a typical Cardiff City fashion side, we then go to Watford and get our first away win of the season, which was like, wow, okay, it's taken us, to the 29th of December to do something. Okay, brilliant. That's a Watford side that were unbeaten at home all season up until that point. And then we just followed up then, didn't we, on New Year's Day with a very Cardiff City-esque draw against Coventry, which I think was the red card, wasn't it? Which was Robinson's, which was, in my opinion, was never a red.
No, it wasn't. But that killed the game, didn't it?
It did.
They got back. They scored straight after the red card, and I think it was the other way around. But we were cruising in that game. And just going back to that Bristol game, made quickly. Sorry, is that Bristol City game? We had scored. We'd had a couple of clear-cut chances. We were absolutely all over them like a rash. We were pressing high. We were playing well. Their fans were booing them at home. So I would have understood going 5 at the back if there was 10 minutes to go, but he did it with 30 minutes to go. And then you could, and I remember saying on the show the next day, that's his inexperience. He's not panicked, but he's kind of gone, I've got to get this win here because we're in a winning position. But actually, if he had just let us carry on, I think we'd have gone on and got 2-3 goals because we were causing them that many problems. The fans had turned and he created his own issues. With Omer Riza, I think one of the things which some people will say it was a good idea, some people will say it's a bad idea, but it was very clear early on that his plan was to get the players on side and to attempt, I do think it was his attempt to make the group tight and make it like a really together group. I don't think it worked, but I understand the thinking. Unfortunately, after the Oxford game, some of the players go to the board and they say, keep Omer Riza in charge and we will keep you up. And this was the message. That there is a mistake for me. And because in no other industry, and I would argue even in football and anywhere, do you get to pick your immediate supervisor or your manager? And I think that's a big issue because the message from the board should have been, no, he is the interim manager. We are going to put the right person in place to make sure that we stay up. And at that point, if you put the right manager in after Boxing Day, with the players available, a couple of signings in January, you could have gone on and finished mid-table, maybe with a bit of really good football and a really good run, gone on and had like a late charge for the playoffs. It wasn't over by any means at that point. But in typical Cardiff City fashion, they listened to the players and they gave him the job till the summer. We'll move on to post-Christmas next. If you have any opinions on the season so far, then and what we've discussed so far, then please do let us know. Drop them in the chat, all that good stuff. And we're going to hear from Gavin Ray. This was from at the start of the season, not long after Alex Robertson had signed, obviously his nephew. And then we'll be back in just a sec. It's been a bit like little glimpses of what you can expect and what will be good when it all kind of clicks. I do think it's a bit unfortunate at the moment because he's brought in a lot of good quality players, but they haven't, they're not quite fit or they're not playing. So he's almost going in largely with the team from last year. So he hasn't been able to implement. He's sort of trying to implement a newer style, but without the players that he's brought in to play that style. So I do get it. I think there's a bit of patience needed. Just on that, I mean, we had a massive chance at 1-0, the one-on-one where he hits the post. If that goes in, that's such a different game because I think that first goal is such a horror show of a mistake that if you equalise quite soon afterwards, you can kind of put it behind you and build on the start you've made. But unfortunately, that was the story of our season last year. We missed a lot of one-on-ones. So hopefully this new striker, Kango, can, once he's up to speed, he'll get the goals.
The home of Welsh sport. This is Cymru Sport.
I'm sorry, this is Cardiff City World. We are live on Cymru Sport Radio. I'm joined by Jamie Anderson as we take an inquest, I guess, into the Cardiff City season. I just realised that the clip I had of Gavin Ray talking is actually me talking to Gavin Ray, not Gavin Ray saying, "Hey," I don't think he said a word, but there we go. We just this clips from throughout the season. So yeah, where we are then. Omer Riza was given the job until the summer. How did you feel about that in the moment there? Were you confident that he could get the best out of the group? Were you excited because he was playing or trying to play a certain type of football? Or were you then concerned because he was very inexperienced and it felt very Cardiff to give the interim manager the job,
Yeah, I think when you look at when he's got, when he was given the job, there were positives. I'm not going to make this all negative about him because he is a lovely person. He had time for the fans, and if you look back on it, he was probably too open with fans, which it sounds daft when you want that level of relationship. But I think there were a lot of positives, which we kind of bought into this wanting to play a nice player football. We wanted to see blood and thunder. He talked quite positively, especially in his early days as manager, and he was eager, he was excited, and we all bought into that, but there was still that element of worry, doubt almost about this inexperience, about were we actually ambitious as a club to almost, did we settle for him almost, or did we actually go out there and try and advocate for other people? Who made the decision? We've heard on multiple occasions when Omer would do it, his press conference, he talked about, he was managing up. He was learning to manage up. So in reference to speaking with Vincent Tan, I think there was a genuine divide, though. I think there was a divide amongst the board level, most certainly. And I think there was a divide amongst fans where we've, in the past, gone, like people say, the cheap option or what have you, or another internal appointment. And it's not got us anywhere. In hindsight's a brilliant thing. As we sit here now, would we have actually said, yes, he was a man? Was probably not. But at the time, I think we just bought into this. Yes, a young manager. He is hoping to play a good brand of football. January's coming around the corner. Can he entice some new players to come in and so on? And it was more hope, I would suppose, I'd say. But things just, when there was, he talked the game. He talked brilliant, game, but for whatever reason, when it was on the pitch, it didn't always marry up. There'd be individual mistakes, there'd be a lack of leadership, and all these sort of quotations of fans saying about inexperience. I think they would then start to be heightened because ultimately he had no real experience behind him. We were all crying out for, if you're going to give him the job, back him up with somebody with experience. It took them a very long time to bring in Richard Shaw. And it was like, why? Who's making these decisions? And ultimately, why are you making these decisions?
Yeah, I think I remember talking around, that time when he got given the job till the summer. And I remember saying they have to give him someone experience to work with, to bounce ideas off, to help him, whether that's a coach or just someone who's a consultant, just someone who's there all the time. Now, what is interesting is, and this is only my belief, this is not based on anything I've been told, I think Richard Shaw was brought in by Omer Riza. So it wasn't even like the club were giving him an extra coach saying, here's some more support. I think that was his choice. And I think what he needed was actually someone who he didn't know necessarily or wasn't friendly with or whatever, or worked with before. He needed someone who was experienced in football management to help him through what became more and more high pressure. Like the pressure just grew. And I think it was clear for everyone to see that, at certain points he found it difficult.
You think, yeah, Ty, the 5th of December was the key date there that he was appointed. And you look at it then, that's the international break, isn't it? So you think, right, the club, they had that block, didn't they, to make an appointment. They made the decision. And I know it was scrutinised because I think the lack of communication from the above. He was in, it was 10 weeks. He was the interim manager before being officially announced. That is shambolic, in my opinion. It should never be that long with, again, if you're that interim manager, you should know within a few weeks if you're going to get the gig or not. So there was all these clouds, these unanswered questions. The media were asking these questions. Do you know about your future, and so on. So then when you look at it, then coming back off the international break, and he's been appointment, his first game is a 2-0 loss against, as I've said, against Preston. You think, oh my goodness, right? Okay, we'll give him then. And then you kind of look at the games subsequently after that, and you go, right, 2-2 away at Stoke. We threw that away because Jack Annick came out and tried punching the ball. Then we lost against Sheffield United at home, which, to be fair to Sheffield United, I think they just played us off the park that day. I think they did a job on us, and no other, we knew that Kiefer would score. He always does against us, doesn't he? And then the Boxing Day, like we said, it kind of started to stir the pot a bit of, is this the guy? Is this the man that is going to take us forward? These elements of uncertainty, these questions that were asked by fans upon his appointment, they were starting to gain more traction because the results that we were hoping weren't happening. And again, like I said, he had his purple patch as his interim, in that sort of 5-0 win against Plymouth and so on earlier in the season, which gave us hope. But then when you concede the goals we were conceding and the volume of goals that we were conceding, you did start to worry. And like I said, your league position, then you start dropping off and you think, this is a worrying time. And I think fans started to get a bit more of a squeaky bum, so to say.
Yeah, and look, what I will say is, you mentioned about the clubs in communication with the fans and the media. I will have you know that Cardiff City took home the Fan Engagement Award at the 2025 EFL Awards in London. So I think that's important that we say how well that Cardiff City engaged with their fans, because they took home an award.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
No sarcasm whatsoever. I promise.
Again, mate, it's a very Cardiff City-like thing to almost be in an air of silence, because there was no Mehmet Dauman on Talk Sport like he's done in the past. There was no Ken Chu reassuring fans and so on. And I think maybe the players were unsure as well. Maybe that replicated in their performances. I'm hypothesizing here, and I'm almost making an excuse. But at that time, there was no.
It was very unsure, wasn't it?
Yeah, and again, we were all kind of like, you can only imagine what it would have been like as a player / manager, whoever it may be, thinking, oh, Wales Online have put a report up saying this manager's in talks with Cardiff or has been linked, and all this paper talk, all this sort of judgment around the club. It's gonna sort of get into your head a little bit. And hindsight's a brilliant thing. I do think a lot of the outside noise eventually got to him and the coaches and so on, which happens in football. They're only human beings. But at that time at Christmas, I think it was very, very bleak. And like I said, going up to Oxford, I think that was the worst. And we've had a drumming. We'll talk about the other drummings in the season, but Oxford away was probably a very, very dark day.
Yeah, and look, coming out of that Christmas period, you have to give Omer Riza a little bit of credit, because from Oxford till the Leeds game, Cardiff that was our best period after Christmas. It was never really, and this is the problem. We never put a winning run together. What we did do is we played Swansea off the park in the derby, and then we drew a lot of games, but you're unbeaten. I want to touch on the South Wales derby, because I think that sort of 45 minutes, maybe a bit longer, 10 minutes before half time, and the second half was probably Cardiff's best singular performance of the season. I think a lot of that was emotion, though, because I think, Omer Riza found out that his father had passed away, and I think it was either the day before or a couple of days before. I think he was actually at training or, down the Vale or whatever. The players were very much for him on that day. Now, regardless of what happened as the season progressed, on that day, the fans, the players, the club, everybody was united around Omer Riza. I think everyone had a tremendous amount of respect for him even being there, because I think if he hadn't come and Darren Pearce or whoever had taken charge, I don't think anyone would have been particularly, shocked or like giving him criticism. Everyone would have understood on a humane point of view. The first half an hour, I thought we were absolutely dreadful. But then all of a sudden, Cardiff started to press. About half hour in, we started to really press high. And, you know, Swansea, I say this all the time. I do like Ben Cabango. I think he's a good footballer and a good defender, but he's young. Harry Darling is, in my opinion, is one of the most overrated centre-backs in the Championship. He causes them a lot of issues with the mistakes and losing the ball in areas where he doesn't want to lose it. We put him under pressure, and you could see just before half-time that, if we keep doing this, we can get at these. But being how we had played for the season and a half before that, you're thinking, yeah, but that's not going to happen. It's the South Wales derby. We never turn up, for one. And two, we can never put together two halves of football where we play well. But in fairness to the players and the managing and the coaches, that second half was electric. They were very, very good. Callum Robinson bags a brace straight after half-time. Gutas gets the header late on. And I think that was the first game that Callum Chambers played in central midfield. I might be wrong on that. I'll have to double check that. But that was where, around that time, was the switch. Callum Chambers goes to midfield. And I think defensively, we did look better when Chambers came out of there. And I think towards the end of the season, you also saw his lack of pace. He does get exposed when he plays centre-back. And I think probably coming into the rest of his career now, as he gets to the last stages of it, I could see him being more of a holding midfielder than a centre back. But talk to me a little bit about the South Wales derby. Obviously, a memorable day, an enjoyable day, and then the kind of that to the Leeds game.
Well, the derby, I think. Excuse me. I think a lot of us were. We were more in hope that we'd actually turn up. I mean, there was all the extra noise. Obviously, we knew that there was a protest going on, and that again, that was fine. Maybe that was because of obviously the lack of plans, and the fans were annoyed with the current regime and the running of the club. Then, obviously, like you said, you take your hat off humane level to Omer, because as the Cantons stand in a City Stadium and sang at the end of the game, "This one's for your dad," it was a very, very memorable day, because not just because of the result, but that feeling of almost, you take your hat off to Omer that day, because I think it'd be challenging for anybody. But like you say, that we started quite poor, and I remember saying to the chap next to me, I think the key is stopping Harry Darling coming out, because what he did was he'd almost his first 25, 30 minutes, his average position was on the halfway line. But like you said, what we did well was we then pushed up on them, and we got higher at the pitch, which stopped him coming out. So then we nullified the fact that his defensive frailties. And I said, the goals we scored were not because necessarily Swansea were poor, but because we did what we do well, which was at the time, which was pressing, putting pressure on them, and creating the other teams to face their own goal. And like I said, even Franco, Joe Allen, and all these players, they weren't able to turn and face our goal, because for every time a Swansea player got a touch, a Cardiff player would be right at the backside, and so on. And I think it was a complete second half performance, wasn't it? It was every player, you had everybody singing, you had everyone like smashing somebody. Franco was getting rattled up by everybody, and it was a brilliant day in general, and quite a poignant thing where you had the players celebrating at the end, Matt Turner with the corner flag and so on. And again, at that time, when you're living it and you're enjoying it, Callum Robinson running up to the Canton stand, you've got Yusuf Salek, a new signing, grabbing 3 Swansea players by the scruffs and stuff. It was brilliant. And that is obviously our probably highest point of the season. Then after your Swansea game, you're on a high. Everyone's really, really happy. We're all happy. Then we go with Millwall away. We then kind of find a way of conceding 2 poor goals, I'd say. It was freezing cold there, remember that night, and they put us in the lower tier. But somehow we found a way. Again, this new sort of striker that we've got. Who's this Yusuf Salek? Well, he goes and bangs you when that last-minute equaliser, and you think, this guy's special. This guy's special. And you think, that's 4 points from 2 games there. You think, hang on, we're turning a corner. New year, we're doing well. Then you go and then Derby at home. It's a 6-pointer as such, and you think, oh, we found a way to win. We've beaten another relegation or lower position team. And at that point, you're thinking, come what the end of January, we've signed some players. There's still areas for probably improvement if we can get some extra players in. But we're in an okay position. We're unbeaten in 3-4 games. We're riding a wave a little bit, and at that point, I don't think you could envisage what would happen off the back of it.
Yeah, and I think on that as well is the Swansea to Derby game. Those few games he played the same 11, and he didn't do that a lot in his time here at Cardiff. Now I know some people think that that's why Rawls ended up picking up another muscular injury, because he played too much in that period, and maybe there's an argument for that. But I mean, when players are on form and the team's on form, you want to keep that rolling. So I also understand that. And he got a lot of criticism for rotating too much. So you can't then criticize him when he keeps the side the same. But yeah, like you say, the Derby game was a big one. And then you're coming out of January and you're thinking, right, he's starting to settle in now. He wasn't going 5 at the back as early. He was leaving it a bit later. So you're thinking, he's learning. He's learning on the job, but he is learning by his mistakes. We went to Hull in February and beat them, but we all know what was coming. The Plymouth game, the draw at Plymouth was a big kick in the teeth. Obviously, Gutas got sent off. That was disappointing. The Bristol City home game in February was a real disappointment. Obviously, Salic gets that last-minute winner again, proving he was a massive signing for us. Yusuf Salic, just his attitude and his goals, and he does such great work between the two posts, which is, I got a video coming out on him actually next week. Well, not on him. It's actually on what we need to do around him to get the best out of him. But, the Plymouth loss at the start of February, I thought that was a big kick in the teeth as well, because, Portsmouth, not Plymouth. We went to Fratton Park. They've been excellent at Fratton Park all season. But, you were 2-0 down in 15 minutes, and it was those defensive mistakes again that kind of caused the problems. And I think, unfortunately, if you'd said to me, by the way, that's what I was going to say. If you said to me on the day of the derby after the game, one of these clubs is going to get relegated, which club do you think is going to be? I would have said Swansea at that point, which is mad, because where they finished compared to where we finished. But they were on a downward slide. It didn't look like they were going to sack the manager. The players were arguing. There was a bit of this going on. Cardiff seemed like they were on a bit of an upward curve. You had the emotion of the derby win, the emotion of everything going on with Rhys. It felt like we were starting to go in the right direction. And then, of course, we all know what is about to come. But, I point to these games like the Portsmouth, the Plymouth draw, the Oxford games. These are the games which cost us ultimately. No one expects us to go to Sheffield United and win. No one expects us to go to Leeds and win. Now, there's a way to win, and there's a way to lose. By the way, just because Leeds won the league and they're an excellent team doesn't mean you go there and roll over and let them stick 7 on you. I also think the Luton game at our place was a massive result. Where was that? That was March time. They score in the 80th minute. We were winning that game. Callum Chambers scored. And then suddenly we're 2-1 down with 10 minutes to go. And I think in the grand scheme of things, those are the games which cost you.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to February, start of February there, you did mention, we obviously debacle at Leeds. He was banned, obviously, because of the issue after the Swansea game. And you look at it there and you thought there was a lack of leadership. But you take it, they're flying, they're on a very, very good run. Then you go to Fratton Park, which at the time was the 6-pointer, wasn't it? And you have Josh Murphy running us left, right and centre. Their striker was just finding pockets, and it felt like we were bullied that night. It felt like, like we did at Ninian Park for many, many years. They cramped the pitch, they condensed the pitch, and the atmosphere down there, to be fair to Portsmouth, I think that's what's kept them up January this season, was their home form was brilliant. It's not an easy place to go to Fratton Park when the fans are on top of you. So, you come home after that game thinking really disappointed that we didn't apply ourselves as well as we should have, and we didn't stand up to the physical battle of Portsmouth. I think, like you say, then you go into a 7-side derby. It's one of those games where anything can go. And, a 1-1 draw isn't a bad result. Go down to Plymouth, 1-0 up. It's another loss. It's another lost 2 points, isn't it? When you have a red card, you're dominating. You should be 3-4-0 up. Plymouth look out of sight, then you give them an easy in. And then we were probably lucky to hold on then. You know, we had to slow the game down. Then we was like 12 minutes added on. You take that point. And like you said, you have the FA Cup run as well. You know, you go to Villa Park, you put such a positive performance in. You put a good positive performance in for the youngsters, and the club have held themselves in good regard that night, I think. You know, the 6,000 fans, was it, that travelled up, and you think, right, let's push on. Let's use that as a template with the youngsters like Dylan Lawler and so on. Let's integrate them into the team, and let's see if we can finish, you know, like this latter part of the season. But then straight back to league form, lose against Burnley. Okay, Burnley are up there, but the manner we lost against Burnley was probably quite poor. They didn't offer a lot that night.
We should have won that game. Second half, we should have won. We didn't take our chances. Again,
their keeper, James Trafford, was pulling at the Sky Bet signs, anything, the old dark arts of the game. And again, you know, that's what happens when you're down the bottom or near the bottom. These things don't go for you. And then I remember going to Sunderland away, and I was quite vocal on one of the other podcasts after a game saying about the five at the back again. Why did we go to five at the back? And, you know, it's these little mistakes and these little sort of learnings that he'd made earlier on in the season. They started going the opposite way this time. And I felt like changes that were being made were not impactful in a positive way. They were more sort of hindering us. And like you said, then the Luton game, isn't it? How we found a way to lose that game, I don't know. You know, we could have been 3, 4, 5, you know, whatever it was. But when you're not clinical and you give a side like Luton, who are fighting for their lives at the time, easy ins, you know, it's very, very hard. And it's just like, you could feel like the frustration, the anger coming out of that stadium that night was, how have we lost that? You know, you've given Luton, who were, you know, pretty much down and out at one stage, you've given them a chance. They hadn't won away for many, many months. And yet we'd given them this easy in. And it was just like, you know, it was written in the script when it's like, Mark McGuinness is going to come back and win. And, you know, that's in March. You're looking, you've got a month and a half left this season, and you've still got no clarity really as to a direction you're playing. What's your best 11? You know, it's a pretty damning indictment of where we were, I think, at the time. And the players look shot of confidence at that point. You think it's hit us. You know, that was a massive game that everyone had blown up as a must win, and we didn't win.
Yeah, it's really, do you know, I look back on the season, mate, right? And there's only maybe one, maybe two games where I feel like we were outplayed by the opposition and deserved to, you know, it's just one of them days. The other team was better. There's only a couple of those games. The rest of them, I really think we just gave teams goals and made mistakes. And even the Burnley game early in the season, which we lost 4-0, we gave them 4 goals. They only had 3 shots on target, I think it was, because the first one is not even a shot on target. I think they had 4 shots on target in the whole game, 3 in the first half, and they were, you know, they went 4-0 up. And for the first 20 minutes of that game, we were excellent. Created chances, had chances, didn't take them, and then we make 3 mistakes and we're 3-0 down. And that was like the story of the season. We didn't get outplayed very much, but we also didn't outplay anybody, really. Plymouth and Swansea for half a game aside. And I think that's the issue, is ultimately we didn't create and we made mistakes constantly. You mentioned Dylan Lawler, mate. Were you disappointed that he didn't get integrated into the first team when you see how he was again recently in the final games, and he was against Villa? Are you disappointed when, you know, you look, we played 3 at the back quite a lot? Should they have integrated him in there with Fish and whoever?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why there would be an argument against it, apart from his inexperience. But, you know, when you go to Aston Villa and you're playing up against some of the, you know, the best players in the Premier League and around Europe, and you put in such a, let's say, a mature and professional performance, then, you know, that's shown the testimony of the character he is, I think. You know, we've seen Norwich on Saturday just gone, how he played. He's blood, he's thunder, but he's also got a bit about him when he's able to pass the ball out. And when you're looking at a philosophy that I think Omer was trying to play, he kind of, you think he would have been the shoe would have fitted, so to say, with him. He'd have been able to distribute the ball, which we've had a look with some certain centre halves, no disrespect to them, but that's not their forte. So when you're trying to implement an attacking possession base and you're trying to drive the ball out, were they playing the right people in those positions? And was that detrimental to our team? You look back on it now and you'd probably argue, yeah, it probably was detrimental. And again, the way I look at it, I think the youngsters that genuinely came in, I think the vast majority of the time, they gave probably just as much quality / effort as the more experienced pros over the season.
Yeah, 100%. Mate, I completely agree. I think, as I said at the very start of the season, start of the show, in terms of the culture in the dressing room, was not the young players who was causing that issue. And equally, on the pitch, I think the young players really did themselves proud. Joe Bagan played centre-back, and I know some people prefer him at left-back and so on. He was very unfortunate that Callum O'Dowd was the vice-captain, but also had played, he was consistently fit, played quite well, so he did. Otherwise, Joe Bagan would have made a lot more appearances at left-back. But I thought he was very good at centre-back as well when he came in, and I thought actually, tactically, he opened us up a little bit on that side by having a left footer in there. And he made one mistake and was dropped at centre-back. And then he came back in, had a nightmare half against QPR, and we never saw him at centre-back again. And I just think that in itself is like really poor management of a young player, because he made one mistake and he had a bad half against QPR, struggled with the physicality. But before that, he had given you game after game of excellent performances, aggressive, and did a lot of the right things. And I look around and I look at Kean Ashford, I look at, Dylan Lawler when he came in. Even when Ruben had games in a row, that was when he played his best stuff. It was when he's in and out, starting, bench. That's when he seems to struggle to find a bit of consistency. But look, Cardiff weren't good enough. And, as the season developed, it became more and more worrying. You go sort of into April, and we are, we're knee deep in it. And the problem is other teams around us started to win. Your Derbies, your Lutons, even Plymouth were picking up victories. In April 12th, Plymouth beat Sheffield United when we lost to Stoke. The following week, we lose to Sheffield United. It's like those little things, not little things at all, but, those things that just went against us. The teams around us were finding points. And I found it remarkable, mate, that we weren't down with about 5 games to go. We just seemed to keep getting chances to stay in touch with the teams around us. It's depressing, mate, and it's difficult to talk about. But I wanted to kind of close off the season by going through it. And to finish off, I really want to talk about some of the things that you think this squad needs for next year, in terms of maybe not individual players, although I just saw someone mention Ricky J. Jones in the comments. I've got a video out on Ricky J. Jones in the next couple of days, so please do check that out. But pace is the big thing for me. But I'm interested in what you would like to see in terms of the evolution of the squad. What would you like to see in, out, shake it all about, loan a few players? What young players do you want to see come through? Give it to me all.
I think we need to be more mobile. I think that for me is the biggest thing. I think we're too static, and we have been for many, many years. I think when the games are more open, that's when we're better. We generally are, because the players can go forward and so on. But I think there's too many patches where, especially this season, we've been static. When there's set pieces, throw-ins, whatever it may be, we're kind of stuck in the mud at times. I think we need, like you said, pace is key there. And utilising pace. If you have got pace, which I think Ollie Tanner has pace at times, I think Kean Ashford has shown pace and stuff, but it's implementing a system that allows that pace to be consistently shown. Because I find at times, I'm not saying there's any given right to score a perfect goal or any way to win a football game, but you go into League One and the pitches aren't as great in League One as they are in the Championship. So you're going to have to mix it up a little bit more. So I think with that in mind, you need a good nucleus of youngsters to complement them. But also I think you need some experienced heads in there that understand that, you know, you are going to be kicked around, you are going to be bullied, because it's not going to be this flash football. Because again, you go, no disrespect to, I don't know, let's say a Stevenage on a Wednesday night, it may be. They're not going to allow you the time and you know, and to enjoy your experience, because you're a big, you know, you're a big club that's coming down. And again, I think this is where the club have to really take this serious. They can't be thinking that, you know, this is going to be an easy summer that we can keep a hold of a few players and we'll be fine. We won't, because at times this season in the Championship, when it's probably a bit less physical, our team hasn't been able to live up to that physicality and deal with it. So I think we need to get a system and a structure implemented straight away, get a philosophy in place that's going to say, right, this is how we play and this is how we're going to, you know, sign players accordingly. And then, like I said, just act and act and act and act and act, as opposed to not reacting, if that makes sense. You know, we need to be more proactive. We need to be thinking ahead, as opposed to thinking, oh, hang on, we haven't got a plan if something were to go wrong. Because I think that's why we're in the position we are now, where we're all discussing, we're having podcasts, we're having chats with your mates, where who's going to come in, what we're going to do. There's more unanswered questions than questions that have been answered. And I think that summarises for me our club, that the fact that the club haven't got a set way and a cohesive boardroom at the top. I think that is probably replicated around the first team over the years.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And I also believe that what we did under Ramsey in the last 3 games, I quite liked, is we're in possession. We kind of had like a 4-4-1-1. And I quite like that, because of what he did and what him and Chris Gunter really tried to drill into those players was the 2 wide guys stand on the touchline and like really make the pitch wide. And I do think in League One, like you mentioned, the pitches and stuff, that sort of system and that kind of philosophy, where it's a bit old school almost, where, you know, get your strikers running the channels, get your wingers wide and getting the ball in the box. Yusuf Salic will score you 20, 30 goals next year if you put the ball in the box. If you get pace in the wide areas and physicality and athleticism and creativity in the central areas and a solid back 4 that picks itself, then I think you're setting yourself up well. Now, in my opinion, I think you need to get some leaders in there and some experienced heads in there. But some people will say, well, there's experienced players there already. No, I'm talking build around the young players we have by putting the right type of experienced players around them. Is there like anyone in particular that you're looking forward to seeing next season, or maybe a partnership? Like I quite like this the feel or the kind of the thought of Will Fish and Dylan Lawler, and giving them a bit of time to bed in as 2 young centre backs, because they could be, you know, if things go well, they could end up being the centre backs for the next 10 years. But yeah, where do you stand with it? Who are you looking forward to sort of seeing break into the first team?
Dylan Lawler, I think, is the number one. I think, like I said earlier, I think he's showing maturity beyond what you'd expect. I think I'd like to see the likes of Kian take his game to the next level, because I think, like we discussed, he was in and out of the team, you know, not to necessarily a fault of his own. The likes of Joe Bagan, I think he could be important. That crunching tackle on Saturday where he took man and ball, that's a sort of attitude that you're going to need. If we can keep O'Dowda, because I'm sure there'll be teams that are after O'Dowda, seeing how if he were to be the captain, how he takes that on, because I think that we talked about the attitude and the application of players. I don't think you can probably question someone like a Callum O'Dowda's attitude or application throughout the season in an unnatural position, probably. So I think there are some glimpses at the club, like with the 21s, there's some good players coming through. Tans Nyakua that you know came on the other day. You've got Troy Perrett. There's some really, really strong youngsters coming through. If we can nurture them into the team, but not forcing them, almost allowing them to have that stability as they come in and allowing them to learn, I think we'll be definitely a lot better than if we are near the top of League One, which I hope we are. then if we to build and keep building, we're going to be in a better position going forward into the Championship in the future. But again, there's no point having youngsters if we're not going to see if they're good enough or not. And bit part playing and is not going to show or allow them to showcase if they're up for it or not.
Do you know what's really like fascinating to me is I've just had a notification come up on my screen. Someone's commented on a video which Evan did yesterday, which was like keep, loan, sell, tier list. And in the comment, the person says, this is going to be controversial, but I think we should sell Callum O'Dowda. And I was like, oh, okay. I haven't heard many people say that, because I think regardless of what you think of Callum O'Dowda's form this year, and I do think it hasn't been as consistent as it can be, I think his application, his attitude, his behaviour, everything which you expect from someone who represents Cardiff City has been absolutely impeccable. And I thought, for me, Player of the Year was a very simple choice. It was between him and Rita Mota. And I think, depending on which way you kind of went, in terms of, for me, Callum O'Dowda was the choice if you were going for how someone represents your football club. And if you were going for someone who maybe has been the most consistent player throughout the season, then you'd probably go with Rita Mota. But obviously the vote, as it were, was Callum Robinson got it. And, you know, it's a democracy, isn't it, at the end of the day?
And I think for me, you know, my last thing on that, with the O'Dowda situation, my big thing is, I hope if the club, naturally, we have taken a financial hit now, you know, as any club would do when you get relegated. So you're going to have to offset some losses somewhere. I would just hope that the powers that be, they don't just look at going, oh, this player's been interested and so on, and then sell for the sake of selling and getting a few £1 million here and there. Because I think what you do there is you then almost, you ruin some sort of foundation that you've set, albeit it's not a great foundation. You're then going to have to integrate new players quickly into a new system or whatever it may be. And ultimately, players need to understand the club. I think Ramsey said that there's nothing better than a Cardiff person or someone who's come through the ranks almost coming back in and understanding what the fans demand and hope for. Because again, in League One, it's a long season. You know, we've got this EFL trophy as well to contend with, and you know, it's a different kettle of fish altogether. But for me, if O'Dowda did go, I'm pretty sure there's probably teams out there going, "Oh, this guy's, you know, he's versatile, he can play." Then that's fine. We wish him all the best, but don't sell him just to get the wages off the books. You know, make sure that we're actually standing our ground. Because, like we said, Yusuf Saleh, he could be a talisman for us, and we can build a team around him. But what we don't want is the clubs to almost lowball us and us to accept it just because of the sake of, oh, we'll get a few £1 million, that'll help it. Because I don't think a lot of fans trust that being reinvested in the correct ways and, you know, the most positive ways.
I mean, the other problem with it is that Cardiff City have got a history of selling cheaply and badly in terms of their star players, if you like. Now, there will be players who, like I said the other day, I would not be shocked whatsoever if a lower Premier League club or a higher Championship club come and test the waters for Ruben Colwell and Dylan Lawler in the summer. Because the way I would look at it, if I was in one of those positions, is if Dylan Lawler plays this season, has a load of clean sheets, plays a lot of first-team football, a lot of starts, he's going to cost $5 million next year. Whereas now I might be able to get him for, you know, especially with Vincent Tan, if I go and offer like $1.5 million plus a shitload of add-ons, will they consider it for someone who's played 2 games? Ruben Colwell hasn't had his greatest season this year. It was consistent at one point, didn't really build on last year. If we chuck him $1.5, $2 million, will they accept that, you know, with some add-ons? Whereas if he goes in League One and gets 30 goal involvements, plays week in, week out, which he's got the ability to do, he's going to cost a lot more than that. And that's what my concern is. I'm not really too concerned if we sell the more experienced players, most of them, like not all of them. There are some exceptions. But those are the players I'm worried about, is your Ruben Colwell's, your Dylan Lawler. Isaac Davis is another one who I think someone might take a punt on because he's only got a year left. So these are the decisions that the club will have to make. And unfortunately for me, historically, they don't make those decisions very good. And like, that's just being honest. We tend to sell badly and we sell cheaply. So we shall see, mate. Look, it's going to be an interesting summer. I don't think there's any doubt about that. We'll be back, or I'll be back, obviously, every day this week with Cardiff City World and different content. Got loads of videos. We've got a couple of scout reports coming on players that have been linked with Cardiff players who we'd like to see with Cardiff. We've got a general video about what we'd like to see with the squad. We've got episode 3 of the rebuild, which is actually entitled Evolving the Squad. So that'll be an interesting one. If you haven't checked out Evan's video yesterday, keep, sell, loan. That was interesting because that's his view on who he'd like to keep and sell and all that stuff. So that was really a really interesting take. And on a slightly different note, I went on Matt's mental health series last night. If you haven't checked that out, please do, and support Matt's series on acepodcastnation. It was a difficult episode and it was difficult to talk about some of that stuff, but I also believe that if you want to change the way people view mental health and their own mental health and other people's, you kind of got to talk about it. Jamie, as always, mate, an absolute pleasure. Bit of a longer show, bit of a longer stint for you this evening. But look, who do you think, in your opinion only, who do you think will be the next Cardiff City manager? It's a difficult question, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think it's Ramsey's to say no to, if I'm honest. I think commercially, he's still a branded name. You know, you're looking at finances. I think he's still a viable, someone to look at the club and go, oh, Ramsey's still there. I think his coaching team with Chris Gunter as well. I think it's someone that knows the club, has been through the club as well. I just like to say, I just like if it was them, like you said, some experience in there to complement them. But I think it's Ramsey's to lose and to say no to almost. And yeah, like I said, credit to the fans that have already bought season tickets. I mean, again, it just shows how loyal we are despite terrible time. Yeah, that we're still putting our monies where our mouths are, so to say. So yeah, I think Ramsey probably is the front runner for me.
Yeah, and I gave my opinion on that earlier, and I kind of stick by that at the moment. There's no one else who I think, they'll do a better job. I understand the argument for people like Nathan Jones, or even like a Ruben Sellers, if he ends up getting sacked. For me, Aaron Ramsey knows Cardiff City. He's got a good football mind, got a good head on his shoulders, will want to play the right way, will give everything for Cardiff City to get back up. And I think he's got the connections, but you've got to give him the right support. If he does take the job, he's got to have a football operations team above him. He's got to have the right coaches with him, and he needs someone who he can bounce ideas off. And look, I get it. Like, he can bounce ideas off Craig Bellamy every day if he wants on the phone, but it's about the football club having a duty of care to the day-to-day operations of the football team. So let's put things in place. Like, say what you will about Omer Riza, but he did October to the end of a season with 3 coaches. Do you know what I mean? Like, in a championship, fighting relegation, and he had 3 coaches, all of whom are pretty inexperienced, really. So it is what it is. So there we have it. We think it's Aaron Ramsey's to say no to. Let us know in the comments what you believe and who you will believe will be the next Cardiff City manager. We'll be back on Cymru Sport soon. I'll be back on Cardiff City World. I'm sure Jamie will be back very soon. He's always knocking about here and there. But we got lots to discuss and lots to go. Appreciate you all. Thank you very much for your time. And we'll see you very, very soon.
If you're hearing this, so are your potential customers. Be heard and reach sports fans across the country. We have advertising opportunities available throughout our programmes, website and commentaries. Working with you, we will create a bespoke package and make sure your message reaches the people you want to hear it. Contact us today to find out how Cymru Sport could help your business. Email contact@cymrusport.cymru.